consider yourself to be introvert, so yeah. Irony of it, isn't it? Maybe I should ask you a different kind of question. How many of you do your best work alone? You know, when you're cutting code and you prefer to be in the quiet corner, just cutting away code? Yeah, a few hands. Do any of you find it really hard to talk about your accomplishments? Yeah, few people. What about preferring to send an email or having a chat over Slack or IM rather than talking to a person directly? Right? Few hands. If you answered yes to any of these questions, right, you're probably exhibiting some of the characteristics of an introvert. Now, there's nothing wrong with being an introvert. Just turn around and look at the person sitting next to you. The chances are that you're looking at maybe, an introvert. Chances are there are 33% chance that it's an introvert. Now, some researchers actually believe that this is about 50%. What it means is every second person that you actually see is actually an introvert. It's a pretty big statistic, right? Now, there's nothing wrong with being an introvert. Well, if you think about it, I mean, it shouldn't come as any surprise to any of you that with such a large number of introverts in the world, almost half of them, that some of the world leaders, politicians, CEOs of companies, and so on, are also introverts. There's a project that was started a few days ago. I'm going to try and stand over here. I have this habit of moving in, and the light just hits my face. So there's a project called the CEO Genome Project that started several years ago. And part of the research, one of the things that they actually found was that introverts actually made really good CEOs, better CEOs than extroverts. And that's kind of like a very general overarching statement. And, it really doesn't mean much, but it's something to think about, right? Now, I said earlier, and some of the world leaders as well, highly influential people. I mean, these are people who influence, and they are all introverts. There's one example is there was a 10-year-old boy who used to run home every day from school because he didn't want to talk to his classmates. And he became one of the leading, one of the most successful influences of his time. He's from India, and he fought for the freedom of India, and his name is Mohandas K Gandhi. And he had a lot of influence on people, right? And he was an introvert. So the title of my talk is actually, it's called The Introvert's Guide to Influencing People and Making an Impact. My name is Mahesh Krishnan. And, I am an introvert. It sounds more like, going to an AA session and confessing. But being an introvert, hasn't stopped me from having a successful career. I've written a couple of books. I speak regularly at conferences. I run a couple of meetups as well myself, and a couple of conferences. I run DDD Melbourne. I run, Azure Global Bootcamp, which is just around the corner next month. So I do a lot of those things. I also am at in a fairly senior position at AGL as well. So being an introvert hasn't stopped me from doing any of these things. However, one of the things that people think about is that you need to be an extrovert to be successful in your career. And that is wrong. The other thing is being an introvert doesn't mean you're not going to put yourself up in front of other people, stand on stage and do talks and those kind of things as well. So what's an introvert? That's the first thing we'll cover today in the agenda, right? And we'll go through a number of things. We'll talk about some of the struggles that introverts face. We'll talk about the strengths that introverts actually have and how we can actually leverage on those strengths. And hopefully, once I wrap up, there will be plenty of opportunities for people to ask questions as well. However, if you're a bit of an introvert and you don't like asking questions out in public, you can always hit me up on, that's not going back now. What's happened? You can always hit me up on Twitter or email me at mail@mahe.sh. So what's an introvert? Anybody want to volunteer? This is the thing, right? So if you're an introvert, you're not going to put your hand up and answer this question at all, right? A much easier question would be like, what is an extrovert? What do people think is an extrovert? And interestingly enough, I'm not sure whether you've seen this TED Talk or you've read her book. Susan Cain, she's written this book called Quiet. The power of introverts in a world that can't stop talking. And she talks about this ideal self, the extrovert, the alpha of the group, this outgoing person. And this person actually takes action over contemplation, takes risks. Whenever there's a decision to be made, he or she takes this decision very quickly. And is very, very, works well in teams and socializes in groups. Right? That's the ideal self. This is the extrovert you're talking about. The introvert is pretty much the opposite. The introvert actually prefers to work alone. And so when I was looking for the definition of an introvert, the thing that actually really struck me was this one. The introverts basically draw energy from within, whereas extroverts draw energy from the surroundings. So extroverts, they feed off energy of other people, right? So they're in group and, when they're working together as a team and everything else, they're able to draw the energy from them, and that gets the best out of them. Introverts, on the other hand, they prefer to work, by themselves when it's quiet, and they draw the energy from within, and that's when they actually do their best work. Now, whenever we talk about introverts and extroverts and so on, we always think about, it's almost like a Boolean thing. You're either an introvert or an extrovert. That's not quite true. There's a big scale of, there's a range. The introvert is on one end and extrovert is on the other. And you can also be an ambivert, stuck right in the middle over there. And, being an ambivert is pretty good because, you can actually work well in a team and, you draw energy from other people. And then during quiet time, you can also work, draw the energy from within and work well. And because it's a range, I can be more extroverted than this person over here and more introverted than this other person as well. So remember that there's a range when I'm talking about being an introvert. Now, one of the things that I want to point out is this Western notion of extroverts. The extroverts is actually a lot more celebrated in the West. From a very young age, we are basically, taught that, in order to succeed, you need to be more outgoing. Go talk to people. Put yourself out there. You need to make more friends. Talk about your achievements and so on and so forth. And so we basically come to this understanding that to succeed in life, or you need to be an extrovert. But for every Steve Jobs, a lot of people consider him to be an extrovert, and seen as a role model for a lot of people. There is also Tim Cook, who succeeded Steve Jobs in Apple, and he's considered an introvert, and he's been equally, if not more, successful in running Apple itself. If you look at the East, right, things like, places like India, China, or Japan for that matter, it's not quite the same. The quiet achiever, the person who actually doesn't make a lot of noise, but just goes about doing his or her work, is also highly celebrated. But what's happened is that this notion of, the extrovert being celebrated has actually started to carry on over there. And we see that taking place over there as well. Right? Something to watch out for. So I want to talk about some of the struggles that introverts face on a day-to-day basis in this day and age, particularly. The first thing is the focus on teams. There's more focus on teams now than ever used to be. How many people work in an Agile project or, follow Scrum or flavor of Agile or whatever it is, right? And what it's done is, it's changed the expectation that developers will be part of a cross-functional team rather than be an individual contributor sign now. And even your workplace, you look at it, is all around, it's all been structured around teamwork and teams. Anyone work in an open office where all the teams sit together and so on? Yeah, a lot of people. I know at AGL, it's all like open desk policy. Nobody gets an office, not even the CEO. Everybody sits in an open space. And for a lot of introverts, whether they struggle with the noise and all the talking and everything that goes around them, this can be a bit of a struggle. And there's no I in team. You're expected to work as a team. You cannot work as an individual. Another struggle that introverts face is talking about their own achievements. Whereas on one hand, I said there's no I in team, but when you're talking about your achievements, you're supposed to talk about I did this, this is what I did and so on. I used to work in the Silicon Valley many years ago, and when I went to one of my first interviews, and they asked me a lot of questions, and I said, oh, we did this, my team did that, and so on and so forth. And the feedback that I got was that, hey, it looks like, you never did anything on your own. It's like, looks like your team carried you. And then I quickly had to recalibrate myself, right? So the next time I went to an interview, it was like, oh, I did that, I worked on this and I worked on this and so on and so forth. And, and sometimes as an introvert, it can actually be really hard to just talk up your own, about yourself. Taking quick decisions. I'm not sure whether, if you've ever gone to buy something like a digital camera or something, right? You go walk up to JB Hi-Fi or something like that, and they've got a special going on. Do you go and instinctively buy it because there's a sale? Or are you the kind of person who's got to do your research beforehand? Exactly know what digital camera that you want to buy and make sure this is the right price and so on. I know friends who actually build up these giant spreadsheets with features and everything else and so on and so forth, right? Now, so what introverts like to do is, rather than actually jump to a decision, they would like to analyze everything. Once they've done their research and everything else and they've made their decision, that's it. They know this is the right one and they'll go for it. But what happens in this day and age is like you are expected to make the decisions very quickly. People, you should have made the decision yesterday, and when you come and ask them this introvert, hey, can you help me with this? And so, well, now hold back a second. I need to know all the information before I can actually make a decision. That can be a bit of a struggle for us. There's just lowered personal boundaries as well. I mean, particularly with social media and everything else, everything is out there, and that can be a bit of a struggle. I mean, I come from India. There's a lot of people over there, in case you didn't know. And even if you're going to the bank and you have someone standing right next to you, it's like, do you mind? I'm trying to withdraw some cash over here, right? Can you just stay away? So there's no concept of this physical, like personal space over there. But what can actually be even more difficult is people invading into my personal space when it comes to thinking and telling me what to do and trying to influence me and so on. And that can be a big struggle. And the last one is being talked over. Generally, introverts tend to be soft-spoken. Not only that, they only speak when they really need to. So, when everyone's like chatting around, talking about in meetings and things like that, this person is just sitting around in the corner and thinking about stuff. And they'll only say when it actually makes sense. But then you could have your sometimes brash, loud, extroverted colleague getting more airtime and, just speaking over this person. So, sometimes you need to do a little bit of chest thumping and talking yourself up and, all that kind of stuff. But, just to make your point across is a bit of a struggle in this environment for a lot of introverts. So what do you do? Like, if you're an introvert, do you basically pretend to be an extrovert? I know a lot of people try and do that, fake it till you make it kind of thing. And that's real difficult. I mean, you're already spending a lot of energy being out of your zone to try and get things done. And if you're pretending, it's going to make it more difficult, right? But introverts have a bunch of strengths that they can actually use to start to influence people. Jennifer Kahnweiler, she's written this book called Quiet Influence. She talks about these 6 trends that people have, and that people can actually use to influence people. So I'll go through each and every one of them. The first one is taking time out. This is the thing where you need to take some time out and start thinking, right? It's like uninterpreted thinking. Plan what you want to do and everything else. Gandhi actually once said, I have so much to accomplish today that I think I must meditate for 2 hours instead of 1. It kind of like seems, counterproductive, right? When you've got lots of things to do, you sit around meditating and contemplating on what you want to do rather than actually doing it. And Jeff Weiner, the CEO of LinkedIn, he sets aside like 2 hours of uninterpreted thinking per day. Think about it, 2 hours every day. And he says that the irony of time management is carving out time to think as opposed to constantly reacting. So what you need to do is, the other thing that you will actually find is that when you block time, and it kind of like helps unleash creativity as well. And not only that, if you've ever been in a long meeting, a workshop or anything, you can actually see how tired you get at the end of the day, or just how once you finish the meeting. So you need basically time to recharge your batteries, and just having that quiet time, taking the time out, will help you a lot in doing so. So how do you actually go about doing this? First thing is you need to start to create a structure. You need to start to block time in your calendar. So you can actually do it. The other thing is you can, I know friends of mine who come in early, start and finish early. They come in at like 7:30 or 8 o'clock in the morning, and they will not accept a meeting request till about 9:30. When they've got their quiet time, they've contemplated what they need to do and everything else before they start accepting any meeting request. It really works for them. Working from home, if you guys have the luxury of working from home, that's a really good way of doing it. Shut down everything else, all the noise and everything else. I sometimes work from home. There's no one at home. The kids are in school. My wife's at work. I'm the only one working. And it just works really well for me. I get a lot more work done on those days when I'm working from home than when I'm at work. Buffering meeting times and activities is also good. If you have 2 meetings, generally back-to-back meetings, where I work, it's always the case where the people see a spare slot on your calendar and they'll book you into a meeting. So you can actually start to block things. Once a meeting is finished, block off like 10-minute slots so you can actually have some quiet time to yourself. You can also manage technology efficiently. Start thinking about getting yourself noise-canceling headphones. Just shuts down all the noise outside, and you can actually start to think. Even shutting down your mobile phone from time to time will help, because the constant ding of these emails and messages that actually keep coming can be distracting. There are several other things you can actually do. Like I like to take I like running. So just that half an hour run in the morning, it just clears your head. You can actually do a lot of thinking when you're running. And that helps me, Obviously, your mileage may vary if you're not into running, something else. Even taking naps, although, in countries like Japan or something, it may be totally acceptable. If someone actually sees you taking a nap at your desk, that may actually create problems over here. So, but there's also this problem where, you start to take too much, time out to do things, and that can be counterproductive as well. There's no such thing as overcharging your batteries, right? You can't take too much of this time. And you have this lost opportunity. People start thinking that you're being too aloof. You spend a lot of time taking time out and things like that. And people say, you're very aloof. Sometimes you may be taken for being a bit snobbish and things like that. Ideas can languish because of, you're constantly thinking and not acting. So you need to kind of like make sure that to balance those two things out as well. The second strength is preparation. Abraham Lincoln is attributed to have saying that give me 6 hours to chop down a tree, and I'll spend the first 4 hours sharpening my axe, right? So having a sharp axe makes the cutting down the tree maybe quicker and easier as well, right? I'll give you an example. Right? A couple of years ago, I decided to switch jobs, and the previous job I had been around for like over 8 years. And I hadn't done an interview in that time. Well, on the other side of the table. I was the one who was doing a lot of interviewing, but had never was never interviewed, I think. So one of the things that I actually did was to prepare really well, right? So what I did was I started writing down, I took, put everything on one note, started writing down each and every question that could potentially be asked. What are the questions that I would actually ask, right? Hey, things like, what are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? Tell me 5 things about give me 5 words that describe you, all kinds of stuff. Are you going to a company, they'll actually ask you, hey, do you know what the values of our company are? All kinds of stuff, right? Things that I would have actually asked if I'm sitting on this side. I spent a lot of time documenting each and everything. What it made was like I was really well prepared, right? So when I went into an interview and people would ask questions like, hey, can you tell me what your weaknesses are? I would straight away say, oh yeah, I know what my weaknesses are, and this is it, and this is what I'm actually doing to actually address it. And suddenly I appear extremely confident, and I know what I'm talking about, and that can actually make a big, big difference. I mean, it's just not interviews alone, right? So anything, you go into a meeting, I spent a lot of years as a consultant. And when you go to see a customer or a client in a meeting, just having that context on why you're doing it and going there, just being well prepared is the difference between being an expert and being not knowing anything over there. So the things that how do you do it? You gather information, insight. There's a lot of research that you can actually do before when you go in to meet someone. You need to strategize. Sometimes, interviewing yourself, just producing like a Q&A, and what are the questions that people can actually ask you, and have those answers up front. Even for a simple meeting, right? You can actually think about what is it that you're going to answer. You can also think about just drafting a plan. This is what I plan on doing in this meeting. Or think of alternate scenarios. So, go into a meeting and with a plan, and, as people start punching holes through this plan, and you have something like an alternate, you can actually start to discuss that as well, right? Just being prepared is really good. Practice, learn your lines, make sure you find your voice so you can actually speak quite well in meetings and so on is good. There's, again, this danger of over-preparing that you need to be aware of. You could get into this analysis paralysis where all you're doing is spending all this time preparing for the meeting and doing things, and then you're not getting your work done. You could also get too focused on your point of view because you spent all your time preparing for that scenario alone, and then suddenly you go in and you're not willing to change your mind. You kind of you'll end up forgetting the end goal, and you'll end up losing focus as well. The third strength is engaged listening, and introverts are really good at listening. Like I said, I spent a number of years as a consultant. I used to be principal consultant for a company, and as part of my job, I used to catch up with pretty much all the consultants out in the field and have a one-on-one with them. And my general opening things would be like, hey, how's it going? What are you doing at the customer side? Very open-ended question. And then suddenly, people will open up and talk about all the problems that they're having at the customer side. They'll say, hey, you know what? I'm doing this and this, and the customer isn't listening, and I'm having so much difficulty getting them to, understand what I'm trying to say, and blah, 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 and everything else. And then I'll ask them, okay, tell me, what is it that you want me to do? And then 8 out of 10 times, the answer would be, well, actually nothing. I didn't want you to do anything. I just wanted, just talking to you actually helped. It's more like a sounding board. They just wanted someone to actually listen to what you're actually saying. And so we are really good at it. There's a book called The Alpha Male, And in that book, they talk about 3 levels of engaged listening. One is around listening for accuracy. So when you hear something from people, you play it back to them, summarize what you've just heard. The other thing is listening with empathy. So you put yourself in the shoes of the person who's doing the talking and feeling what they feel. You may not agree with them, but you can at least empathize with their, what they're trying to say, in spite of holding a different view. The last one is listening for intention. So what is the intention of the person telling you something? So if you get those 3 things, then you are an engaged listener. So to do this listening, right, so you need to create the right conditions. Have you guys heard of Are You Okay Day? Anyone? Right, a few people. It's about this, this day in the year where it should be every year, you need to be asking your colleague how, are you okay? But, at least once a year, you can ask that question, are you okay, right? And you're encouraged to ask your friend, your colleague, anyone, are you okay? Now, imagine, right, you think yourself you're an engaged listener and you're walking down the corridor and then you bump into your friend and say, hey, are you okay? And this person say, well, actually, no. And then it's not like you're going to say, well, I've got to rush to this meeting. Let me go there and then I'll come and chat with you later, right? It defeats the purpose. It kind of like sends a message, well, this meeting is more important than you being okay, so, I'll deal with you later kind of thing. So anything that you want to do, you need to make sure that you create the right environment for this, right? And when you're listening to this person, you need to be engaged, right? You shouldn't be multitasking. There's nothing worse than looking in your mobile phone and doing something while you're chatting to this person, or even opening up your laptop and typing something. Unless you're telling them, hey, I'm just taking some notes so I can refer to, you just keep talking, I'm taking it, right? At least that person knows that you're listening. You got to make eye contact with this person and talk to this person. And of course, face-to-face really helps when you're doing, when you're listening to people. But sometimes, multiple points of view, you're trying to get a lot of information from a lot of people, even surveys and things like that help. You need to be a sounding board. Like, how many of you have had this thing where someone is trying to debug a really difficult piece of code or something like that? And then they say, hey, come over, I just need your help with something. And then you're sitting right next to them and they're explaining, this is what I've done, look at this code and so on. And it's like, oh, there you go, I found the problem. That's it. And so, thanks for helping me out. And like, I'm sitting over there, I was like, I don't do anything. All I was doing is listening to you, right? And they worked it out by themselves. And, sometimes people just need that. And it's sometimes important to add value to the conversation as such, right? So there's nothing, you talk about all the overuse of listening as well. One of the problems is that you're listening, but you're not contributing, you're not asking enough questions. Or sometimes you ask too many questions as well. So there's this loss of credibility because you're asking too many questions as well. Or because you're not asking any questions, that could be another problem. The other thing is that when you're listening, you kind of like get into this conflict avoidance zone where you're trying to you're being too empathetic and you don't want to lead the situation into conflict, and that can be a bad thing. Sometimes some conflict is good, otherwise you'll have no alternate viewpoint. So think about that as well. And one of the key things you need to watch out for is you don't want this to change into a whinging session where the other person is just venting and venting and venting, and you're just there for someone to actually listen to all the whinges, right? So that's something you need to watch out for. Kind of like an extension of this is to have focused conversations. Again, I'll actually give you an example, right? I mean, it's part of my my role. One of the I used to I had to report into a project governance council every couple of months to give them a status update. So there are different people within this group, right? And they had different priorities. Some of them were interested in what we're doing in terms of security. Some of them, all they wanted to know is what we've done with the money, right? There'll be other things. Other people will be interested in different things, architecture, how it fits in, and so on and so forth. Now, what I would do is, before I even went to this governance council, I would actually have scheduled one-on-one with each and every one of them. I would explain to them all the things that they're doing and specifically address the concerns that they're having. So what I did was, when I eventually went up to the governance council, it was literally like, hey, what are we doing? I've had this conversation with these people, and so on. Is everyone happy? And yes, they're happy. And then, that's it. It's done. It's a lot more easier. Having these focused conversations also helps with things like, conflict resolution and so on. And one of the key things that you need to do is same thing, just like the REO, just as like engaged listening, you need to make sure that you set up the space and time. There's nothing like setting up, too little time. I'm going to catch up with you 15 minutes and, I'll explain everything to you. Maybe that time is not enough, right? So you need to make sure that you've allocated enough space, the right space and the right enough time to actually have those conversations. One of the things that actually worked really well for me, catching up with some of my colleagues, was to have walking meetings, right? We just literally walk down the block, and it's one-on-one conversation, just the two of us having that conversation, walking around the block, and that really helped having those conversations. But every time you have a focused conversation, you need to be prepared. And this is one of the key things, right? So I talk about some of these strengths and so on. You need to make sure that you are leveraging on more than one strength. And some of all these strengths complement each other. So just having that preparation done beforehand will help you in this focused conversation. Again, some of the things that you need to worry about is, invasion of privacy. People may not want to have some of the conversation. You don't want to force the conversation, right? There's also things like you need to decide when you want to have a conversation and when you want to do research and those kind of things. So you shouldn't mix them up. There's also this the danger of groupthink. So desire for conformity and harmony kind of like ends up with the wrong decision and curbs creativity and things like that. And sometimes the power of silence can actually be a good thing, particularly when you're conflict resolution and things like that. Maybe you shouldn't just say anything. Just let it go. Writing is another thing that introverts can actually use really effectively. Now, not sure whether you guys have heard the story. There's a woman by the name of Susan Fowler who used to work for Uber. And February last year, she basically put up a blog post talking about her experience in Uber. Now, basically, the story goes that I think she joined Uber in like 2015 or something like that. And the first week, her manager actually propositioned her on chat. First week. And now she took screenshots of all these things, right? And she went over to HR and said, hey, look, what is this kind of behavior? This is my first week, and look, this is already what's happening with my boss. And HR basically said, oh, you know what? This is a high-performing employee, and what we suggest is that you actually change groups. I mean, this is pretty bad, right? Which I think she really wanted to work at Uber at that point in time, so she decided to basically ignore some of these things. And she stayed there for a couple of more years, but in those 2 years, she had this constant run-on with management. She was constantly being undermined by her boss and all this kind of stuff. And then, finally she had enough. She decided to quit. And then she put up this big blog post. And she published all her experiences in Uber and everything else. And straight away, it had a big impact, right? Just within a short duration, I think Uber said, well, they hired a former U.S. Attorney General to investigate what's happening. And within a few months, the CEO of Uber had to quit. Well, that's the power of writing. See, and the thing is, like when I'm talking about writing, I'm not talking about a blog post or it can be an email. It can be a white paper. It can even be a PowerPoint presentation. Whatever works, right, for you in that situation, use that. And of course, you need to adapt to the audience, and you need to make a persuasive case. I'm not sure whether you've heard of this. Aristotle, I think, coined these three things about ethos, logos, and pathos. Ethos effectively create credibility, show that you're an expert, right? Whenever you're saying something, the audience, the people who are actually listening need to know that you're an expert. Add credibility to whatever you're saying. Logos is all around using logic to support your argument. And pathos is about bringing that emotion to that whole thing. If you don't invest in this technology, our project is doomed to fail, right? It kind of like shows that, you're really, that strong wording and everything else, that passion that you bring to it. And of course, you need to remember that when you're writing, make sure that you're not writing for yourself, but for others. So you need to kind of like make sure you write it for the specified audience. You can also have inefficient comms. You need to pick up the phone sometimes and talk to people. And there's also the danger of unexpected consequence, which is like, your point of view being recognized as the official point of view sometimes. So you need to be very careful what you write as well. The last one that I want to talk about is social media. Now, social media, not always, in this context, doesn't mean things like Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, right? There are lots of other media that if you're a developer, that you can be very comfortable with and make an impact. LinkedIn is one of them. I know a lot of my friends, post quite regularly on LinkedIn and get a lot of responses. Just participating in forums. Stack Overflow is another one, as an example. You can actually put your point across. How many of you have subscribed to Pluralsight or seen Pluralsight videos? Scott Allen, did a lot of courses on JavaScript and Angular and things like that. He became the first millionaire through Pluralsight. Basically, created all these videos and things like that, and millionaire. And another example I want to talk about is if I say the name of Salman Khan, anyone know who it is? But if I say Khan Academy, right, and then suddenly people go like, oh yeah, I know Khan Academy, right? And it's not about making money or making people millionaires in this case, but the kind of influence he's had, it's had in providing education for free. That's just immense. So when you are using social media, think about know your purpose. What you're trying to do is really important. You don't have to wait for the perfect opportunity to start. You just got to start somewhere and just get on with it. There's the importance of engaging frequently. So, if you're even putting like a blog post or a podcast or whatever it may be, if you do it regularly, like maybe every regular cadence, it could be a week, it could be a month, whatever it is, right? That's when you kind of like set an expectation that it's going to be regular, and that's really important. Of course, there are gotchas in this as well. You got to think about information overload. Have you guys ever followed someone on Twitter and they keep posting every few seconds and you get annoyed, oh, man, this is too much noise, I'm going to unsubscribe to this person, right? So you need to be careful about that. Ignored audiences as well. You put something up in a certain medium, maybe LinkedIn. Maybe some of the people that you really want to read this aren't on LinkedIn. So, those are the dangers that you need to look out for. Of course, it can lead to device addiction. I know people who are always looking at their phones, are like, oh, I got a like, oh, someone's put in a comment and things like that. So you need to be aware of that. Sorry? Yeah, that's right, yeah. And that can be annoying, right? So, and there's nothing more annoying than someone actually putting a number puzzle on LinkedIn. And you find this number and you're like, why? Anyway, so I think I probably ran out of time, probably exceeded my time. A few key takeaways for everyone. I want to point out that introverts can leverage on their strengths rather than pretend to be an extrovert, right? That's the first thing. You already have those strengths. And the key 6 strengths that I spoke about were taking time out, preparing well ahead of time, right? Being an engaged listener, having focused conversations with people, writing, and the use of social media. I'll also mention, the dangers of overuse of these trends. That can be counterproductive as well. Now, there are 2 books that I would like to recommend. I've used some of them in this talk. One is Quiet by Susan Cain, and the other one is The Quiet Influence by Jennifer Kahnweiler. And That's all I had.